911 operator. 911, what's your emergency? Caller, she's bleeding. I think she's dying, there's blood everywhere. 911 operator. Sir, I need you to tell me what happened. Caller, I shot her. She was going for her purse. I thought she had a gun. In 12 hours, 29-year-old Naomi Ellis was supposed to walk down the aisle in her dream wedding dress. Her family had flown in from across the country. The venue was decorated. The cake was ready. Instead, she was lying on her apartment floor, fighting for her life as 6 bullets tore through her body. But here's what will shock you. The man who pulled that trigger 6 times, the man whose voice you just heard on that chilling 911 call, walked out of a courtroom completely free. No prison time, no conviction, nothing. How does a man shoot his fiancé 6 times and convince a jury it was self-defense? How does our justice system fail so catastrophically that attempted murder becomes justified protection? I'm about to take you inside one of the most controversial cases in recent memory, a case that exposes the deadly gaps in our legal system and asks the question, if 6 bullets in a defenseless woman isn't attempted murder, then what is? This is the story of Naomi Ellis, and it will change how you think about justice forever. Picture this, it's 2015 in Miami, Florida. Naomi Ellis is living her best life. At 26, she's a dedicated elementary school teacher who lights up every room she enters. Her students adore her. Her colleagues respect her. Her family considers her the responsible one, the one who always has her life together. Then she meets Marcus Reed. Marcus is 34, a decorated Iraq War veteran with a charming smile and stories that captivate everyone at the local hangout spots. He's tall, confident, and seems to have that protective quality that makes Naomi feel safe in a world that often feels chaotic for a young professional woman. Their early dates are straight out of a romantic comedy. Marcus brings her flowers. He opens doors. He listens intently when she talks about her challenging students and celebrates her small victories like they're his own. Naomi's friends watch this courtship unfold and think, finally, she found her person. But here's what nobody saw coming. And maybe this is a question you should ask yourself as we go through this story. When someone seems too perfect, too attentive, too interested in every detail of your life, when does love become control? By 2017, Marcus and Naomi are living together, and the wedding planning is in full swing. They've booked the venue, ordered the flowers, sent out invitations. Naomi's wedding dress hangs in their shared closet like a symbol of the future she's dreaming about. From the outside, they look like the perfect couple preparing for their perfect day. But inside their apartment, a very different story is unfolding. It starts small, the way these things always do. Marcus begins questioning Naomi about her day in detail that feels less like interest and more like interrogation. Where did you go? Who did you talk to? Why were you 10 minutes late coming home? Her friends start noticing changes. Naomi, who used to be the life of every gathering, becomes quieter, more reserved. She stops joining them for after-work drinks. She cancels plans at the last minute. When they ask about it, she has explanations that sound reasonable but somehow don't feel right. Marcus just likes us to spend time together, she tells her best friend Sarah. He says we don't get enough couple time. Sarah later told investigators that something in Naomi's voice during that conversation made her skin crawl, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Have you ever had that feeling about a friend's relationship? That gut instinct that something isn't right, even when you can't prove it? The first physical incident that we know about happens at a Denny's restaurant in late 2017. Marcus and Naomi are having what appears to be a normal dinner when something sets Marcus off. Witnesses described seeing him suddenly grab Naomi and slam her onto the table, sending food and dishes crashing to the floor. The restaurant calls police. Marcus is arrested for domestic battery. But by the time the case goes to court, Naomi has changed her story. She tells the judge it wasn't as bad as it looked. She says she doesn't want to press charges. The case is dismissed. Sound familiar? It's the classic cycle of domestic abuse playing out exactly as it does in textbooks and training seminars. But knowing the pattern doesn't make it any easier to break, especially when the abuser is skilled at manipulation. Because here's the thing about Marcus Reed that makes this case so chilling. He wasn't just physically abusive. He was psychologically calculated in ways that would make your blood run cold. Marcus begins sleeping with an AR-15 rifle between him and Naomi in their bed every night. Think about that for a moment. Every single night, Naomi goes to sleep with a military-grade weapon inches from her body. Marcus tells her it's for protection, but the message is clear. I have the power to end your life at any moment. He starts tracking her movements obsessively. He shows up at her school unexpectedly. He monitors her phone calls and text messages. He isolates her from friends and family systematically, creating a world where he is her only reality. Naomi's sister Jennifer later told investigators that during phone calls, she could hear Marcus in the background, listening to every word. It was like he was holding her prisoner in her own life, Jennifer said. By early 2018, Naomi is living in what can only be described as a hostage situation. But she's still planning her wedding, still going through the motions of a woman preparing for the happiest day of her life. Why do you think she stayed? It's easy to judge from the outside, but put yourself in her shoes. You're isolated from your support system. Your abuser is a military veteran who keeps weapons around you constantly. He's demonstrated his capacity for violence, but he's also demonstrated his ability to manipulate the legal system. Where do you turn? February 2018. Something inside Naomi finally breaks. Maybe it's seeing the fear in her student's eyes when she shows up to work with bruises she can't quite cover with makeup. Maybe it's the realization that her wedding day is approaching, and instead of excitement, she feels dread. Maybe it's just the human spirit refusing to be crushed completely. Whatever the catalyst, Naomi does something incredibly brave. She calls the police and reports Marcus for domestic violence. The officers who respond to her call document everything meticulously. They photograph bruises on her arms, neck, and back. They take detailed statements about the pattern of abuse. They help her understand her options, including obtaining a restraining order. On February 23, 2018, Naomi Ellis walks into a Miami courthouse and gets a temporary restraining order against Marcus Reed. The order is clear. Marcus cannot come within 500 feet of Naomi, her workplace, or her residence. He cannot contact her in any way. For the first time in months, Naomi sleeps peacefully. She tells her friends she feels like she can breathe again. She even starts to believe that maybe, just maybe, she can get her life back. But here's the question that haunts this entire case. What good is a piece of paper against someone who's already demonstrated they don't respect laws, boundaries, or human life? Marcus Reed is about to provide a horrifying answer to that question. Despite the restraining order, despite the legal consequences he's facing, despite knowing that any contact with Naomi could land him in jail, Marcus makes a decision that reveals the depths of his obsession and the danger he poses. He decides he's going to that wedding, whether Naomi wants him there or not. But first, he's going to make sure there's no wedding to attend. The date is April 15, 2018. In less than 12 hours, Naomi Ellis is supposed to become Mrs. Marcus Reed in front of 150 guests who have traveled from across the country to celebrate what they believe will be the happiest day of her life. Instead, this day will become the longest, most terrifying day of Naomi's existence. It starts at 8:30 a.m. Naomi is in her apartment, probably feeling a mixture of anxiety and relief. Anxiety because any bride feels nervous on her wedding day. Relief because she has the restraining order, because she's taking control of her life, because maybe she can still salvage this day and make it about her new beginning rather than her nightmare. Then she hears a key in the lock. Marcus walks through the door like he owns the place, like there's no restraining order, like the legal system doesn't exist. The look on his face, Naomi later tells investigators, is one she's never seen before, pure rage mixed with something that looks almost like excitement. "We need to talk," he says. Now put yourself in Naomi's position. The man who has terrorized you for months, who you've taken legal action against, who you've specifically gotten a court order to keep away from you, is standing in your living room on what's supposed to be your wedding day. What do? Naomi does exactly what she should do. She calls 911. The police arrive within 12 minutes. They find Marcus still in the apartment, and they arrest him immediately for violating the restraining order. As they're putting him in handcuffs, Marcus looks directly at Naomi and says something that makes her blood freeze. This isn't over. The officers take Marcus away. They assure Naomi that he'll be held until he can see a judge, which won't be until Monday since it's a Sunday. They tell her she's safe for the rest of the weekend. But here's where our justice system fails catastrophically. Marcus posts bond within 2 hours and is back on the street. Think about that. A man violates a restraining order on the day he's supposed to marry his victim, gets arrested, and is free again in 2 hours. How does that make any sense? At 11:45 a.m., Naomi is trying to process what just happened when she hears footsteps outside her apartment door. She looks through the peephole, and her heart stops. Marcus is back. This time, when the police arrive, Marcus isn't inside the apartment. He's sitting in his car in the parking lot, technically not violating the restraining order, since he's not within 500 feet of her building. The officers talk to him, but there's nothing they can legally do. He's not breaking any laws by sitting in a public parking lot. But the message is clear: I can get to you whenever I want. Your restraining order means nothing. The police can't protect you. The officers suggest that Naomi might want to stay somewhere else for the night. Maybe go to a friend's house. Maybe get a hotel room. They're trying to help, but what they're really saying is that they can't guarantee her safety in her own home. Naomi makes a decision that she'll regret for the rest of her life. She decides to stay. This is her apartment. This is her wedding day, even if it's not going as planned. She's not going to let Marcus chase her out of her own life anymore. As the sun sets on April 15, 2018, Naomi Ellis has no idea that she has approximately 2 hours left before her life changes forever. It's 8:17 p.m. Naomi is sitting on her sofa, probably trying to process the surreal nature of her day. Her wedding dress is still hanging in the closet. Her guests are calling, confused about whether the ceremony is still happening. Her family is worried sick. Then she hears the key in the lock for the third time. Marcus enters the apartment, and this time, everything about his demeanor is different. The rage is still there, but now there's something else. A cold calculation that makes Naomi realize she's in more danger than she's ever been in her life. We're going to settle this once and for all, Marcus says. What happens next is documented through the 911 call that Marcus himself makes. But the events leading up to that call are known only through Naomi's testimony and the evidence left at the scene. According to Naomi, Marcus begins screaming at her about the restraining order, about the wedding, about how she's humiliated him in front of everyone they know. He's pacing back and forth in the small living room like a caged animal. Naomi, trying to de-escalate the situation, tells him they can work things out. They can postpone the wedding. They can go to counseling. She's trying to save her own life by giving him what she thinks he wants to hear. But Marcus is beyond reasoning. He's beyond negotiation. He's made a decision, and nothing Naomi says is going to change his mind. He walks out of the apartment, and for a moment, Naomi thinks maybe he's leaving. Maybe this nightmare is over. Maybe she can finally breathe. Then he comes back through the door, and in his hands is something that makes Naomi's world stop, a loaded handgun. "I got something for your ass," Naomi allegedly says in that moment, according to Marcus's later testimony. But here's the thing: those words, if they were even said, were the words of a woman who had been terrorized for months finally reaching her breaking point. They were the words of someone who had nothing left to lose. Marcus Reed's response to those alleged words was to raise his gun and fire 6 shots into the woman he was supposed to marry in 12 hours. 6 shots. Into a woman sitting on a sofa. A woman who had no weapon. A woman who had no way to defend herself. A woman who had spent months trying to escape the very situation she now found herself trapped in. As Naomi falls to the floor, blood pouring from wounds in her stomach and legs, Marcus Reed pulls out his phone and dials 911. But what he says in that call, and more importantly, what he does while making that call, will become the center of one of the most controversial trials in recent memory. 911 call audio plays. 911 operator. 911, what's your emergency? Marcus Reed. I just shot my fiancé. She's bleeding really bad. 911 operator. Sir, where are you located? Marcus Reed. We're at address redacted. She was reaching for her purse. I thought she had a gun. That's Marcus Reed's voice you're hearing, and if you listen carefully to the full call, what you hear next will make your blood run cold. As Marcus is talking to the 911 operator, as Naomi is bleeding out on the floor behind him, he says something that reveals everything about his mindset in that moment. Look what you made me do. He's not talking to the 911 operator. He's talking to Naomi, who is fighting for her life 6 feet away from him. The woman he just shot 6 times, and he's blaming her for making him do it. But here's what makes this call even more chilling. While he's on the phone with 911, while paramedics are being dispatched, while Naomi is in critical condition, Marcus Reed takes the time to wash his hands and wipe down the gun he just used to try to kill her. Think about that for a moment. This isn't the behavior of someone who just acted in self-defense. This isn't the behavior of someone who's in shock after a traumatic event. This is the behavior of someone who knows exactly what they've done and is trying to cover their tracks. The 911 operator asks Marcus to perform CPR on Naomi. His response? I don't know how to do CPR. This is a military veteran. Someone trained in battlefield medicine. Someone who has undoubtedly seen combat injuries. But he claims he doesn't know how to perform basic CPR on the woman he supposedly loves. When paramedics arrive at 8:43 p.m., they find Marcus Reed sitting calmly outside the apartment building. He's cleaned himself up. He's composed. He immediately tells them that Naomi was reaching for her purse, and he thought she had a gun. Inside the apartment, they find Naomi Ellis unconscious in a pool of blood, with 6 gunshot wounds to her stomach and legs. Her purse is sitting on the sofa where Marcus claims she was reaching for it. But here's the thing about that purse that becomes crucial later. It's a small evening clutch that couldn't possibly conceal a weapon of any kind. And when police search it, they find nothing but typical purse contents. Keys, lipstick, her phone, and about $30 in cash. No gun. No weapon of any kind. Nothing that could possibly justify 6 gunshots in self-defense. Naomi Ellis is rushed to Jackson Memorial Hospital, where she undergoes the first of what will become 11 surgeries to save her life. Doctors later say that if the paramedics had arrived even 5 minutes later, she would have died. Marcus Reed is arrested at the scene and charged with attempted first-degree murder. But this is where our story takes a turn that will make you question everything you think you know about our justice system. For the next 6 months, while Marcus Reed sits in jail awaiting trial, Naomi Ellis fights 2 battles simultaneously, one for her physical recovery and one for justice. The physical battle is brutal. 11 surgeries to repair the damage from 6 gunshots. Months of physical therapy to learn how to walk again. Permanent disabilities that will affect her for the rest of her life. Naomi now needs a cane to walk, and she experiences chronic pain every single day. But it's the psychological battle that might be even harder. Naomi suffers from severe PTSD. She has nightmares. She can't be alone in rooms. The sound of keys in a lock sends her into panic attacks. The woman who used to light up every room she entered now struggles to leave her house. Yet despite all of this trauma, despite everything she's been through, Naomi makes a decision that shows incredible courage. She decides to testify against Marcus Reed. In her victim impact statement, Naomi tells the court, "He used his body to prevent me from fleeing or answering the door to police. He controlled every aspect of my life through intimidation and fear." She describes the months of psychological torture, the physical abuse, the way Marcus systematically isolated her from everyone she loved. She explains how the AR-15 in their bed was a constant reminder that he could kill her at any time. Most importantly, she tells the court that there was no weapon in her purse, that she never threatened Marcus in any way, and that his claim of self-defense is a complete fabrication. The evidence seems overwhelming. Marcus violated a restraining order 3 times in one day. He had a history of domestic violence. He shot an unarmed woman 6 times while she was sitting on a sofa. He showed no remorse in the 911 call and even blamed the victim. Any reasonable person looking at these facts would conclude that this is a clear case of attempted murder. The prosecution is confident they have an airtight case. But then something happens that no one expects, something that will expose the fatal flaws in our justice system and lead to one of the most controversial verdicts in recent memory. Marcus Reed initially accepts a plea deal for 20 years in prison. It's not life, which many people think would be more appropriate, but it's substantial time for what he did. The deal is presented to Judge Ellen Sue Venzer for approval. Judge Venzer listens to Naomi's testimony about the abuse, about the shooting, about how this man destroyed her life. Then she makes a decision that shocks everyone in the courtroom. She rejects the plea deal. I think that the idea here is that I would have to agree that that would be an appropriate sentence, and I don't, Judge Venzer says from the bench. Now, you might think this is good news for Naomi. You might think the judge wants Marcus to serve more time, not less. But what happens next will make you question everything about how justice works in America. Marcus Reed withdraws his guilty plea and demands a jury trial, claiming self-defense. And that's when this case goes from a clear-cut domestic violence attempted murder to something that exposes the darkest corners of our legal system. The trial of Marcus Reed begins on a hot Miami morning in August 2019, more than a year after he shot Naomi Ellis 6 times. The courtroom is packed with Naomi's family and friends, all expecting to see justice served for the woman they love. Marcus Reed's defense strategy is as calculated as it is disturbing. His lawyers don't deny that he shot Naomi 6 times. They don't deny that he violated the restraining order. They don't deny the pattern of abuse. Instead, they craft a narrative that turns the victim into the aggressor and the shooter into the victim. Their argument goes like this: Marcus Reed, despite being a large, strong military veteran, was in fear for his life from Naomi Ellis, a woman who weighs barely 120 pounds and had no weapon. According to the defense, when Naomi allegedly said, "I got something for your ass," and reached for her purse, Marcus reasonably believed she was reaching for a gun. Let me ask you something. Does that sound reasonable to you? A trained combat veteran, someone skilled in hand-to-hand combat, someone who outweighs his victim by at least 60 pounds, claims he was in mortal fear of a woman sitting on a sofa? But here's where the case takes a turn that no one sees coming. The prosecution makes a mistake that almost derails their entire case. During opening statements, the prosecutor tells the jury that there was no purse on the sofa. They claim that Marcus's story about Naomi reaching for her purse is a complete fabrication. But when the defense presents their evidence, they prove conclusively that there was indeed a purse on the sofa. Crime scene photos show it clearly. The prosecution was wrong. In a moment that legal experts say is almost unprecedented, the prosecutor stands up in front of the jury and apologizes for the error. They admit they were wrong about the purse. Now, the purse still contained no weapon. It still couldn't have concealed anything dangerous. Marcus still shot an unarmed woman 6 times. But the prosecution's credibility is damaged, and the defense seizes on this mistake to support their self-defense claim. Marcus Reed takes the stand in his own defense, and his performance is nothing short of masterful manipulation. He cries as he describes his fear. He talks about his military service and the PTSD he suffers from combat. He portrays himself as a man who was forced to make a split-second decision to save his own life. He never mentions the months of abuse. He never acknowledges the restraining order violations. He never explains why, if he was truly acting in self-defense, he took the time to wash his hands and clean the gun while Naomi was bleeding to death. Instead, he presents himself as the real victim in this case, a man who has been unfairly prosecuted for protecting himself against an aggressive woman who was reaching for what he believed was a weapon. The jury deliberates for just one day. When they return to the courtroom, the foreman stands up and delivers a verdict that will haunt Naomi Ellis for the rest of her life. Not guilty on all charges. Marcus Reed, the man who shot his fiancé 6 times on the night before their wedding, walks out of the courtroom a free man. The reaction in the courtroom is immediate and visceral. Naomi's family members cry out in disbelief. Her sister Jennifer collapses in her seat, sobbing. Naomi herself sits in stunned silence, unable to process what she's just heard. Marcus Reed's supporters celebrate. His defense attorney tells reporters that justice was served and that the jury saw through the prosecution's attempts to vilify a man who was simply protecting himself. But Naomi Ellis, the woman who will live with the physical and emotional scars of 6 gunshots for the rest of her life, has a different perspective. Where in the world can somebody shoot you 6 times as you sit on a sofa and be able to walk out the door? She asks reporters outside the courthouse. How is that self-defense? It's a question that legal experts, domestic violence advocates, and ordinary citizens are still asking today. How did our justice system fail so completely? The answer lies in the uncomfortable intersection of self-defense laws, domestic violence dynamics, and jury psychology. Florida's Stand Your Ground law allows people to use deadly force if they reasonably believe it's necessary to prevent death or great bodily harm. The key word is reasonably. But what's reasonable is often in the eye of the beholder. When domestic violence cases go to trial, juries often struggle with the complex dynamics of abusive relationships. They don't understand why victims stay. They don't recognize the patterns of control and manipulation. They sometimes blame victims for not leaving sooner. In Marcus Reed's case, his defense successfully convinced the jury that despite his larger size, despite his military training, despite his history of violence, he was the one in danger. They convinced 12 people that 6 gunshots into an unarmed woman was a reasonable response to the alleged threat of someone reaching for a purse. But there's another factor that makes this case even more troubling: the role of gender and racial bias in how we perceive defendants and victims. Marcus Reed is a black man. In the American criminal justice system, black defendants are often viewed more harshly, receive longer sentences, and are less likely to be believed when they claim self-defense. Yet in this case, those same biases might have worked in his favor when he claimed to be afraid of his much smaller victim. The defense played into stereotypes about aggressive women and victimized men. They portrayed Naomi as the real aggressor and Marcus as someone just trying to protect himself. It's a narrative that doesn't match the evidence, but it's one that resonated with this particular jury. Meanwhile, Naomi Ellis faces a lifetime of consequences for surviving attempted murder. She deals with chronic pain from her injuries. She struggles with PTSD. She's had to rebuild her entire life from scratch. But perhaps most devastatingly, she's had to live with the knowledge that our justice system looked at what happened to her and decided it wasn't a crime. Today, more than 5 years after that horrific night in April 2018, both Naomi Ellis and Marcus Reed are trying to move forward with their lives in very different ways. Marcus Reed walks free, though he has faced some consequences for his actions. He was convicted on separate misdemeanor charges related to violating the restraining order and served a brief jail sentence. But for the attempted murder of Naomi Ellis, for shooting her 6 times and leaving her to die, he faced no punishment whatsoever. He has largely stayed out of the public eye since the trial, though domestic violence advocates continue to point to his case as an example of how our legal system fails victims. Naomi Ellis, meanwhile, has transformed her trauma into advocacy. Despite the physical limitations from her injuries, despite the ongoing psychological effects of what she survived, she has become a powerful voice for domestic violence survivors. She speaks at conferences and workshops, sharing her story to help other women recognize the warning signs of abuse. She works with legislators to strengthen restraining order protections and close loopholes in self-defense laws that can be exploited by abusers. "I'm going to be relentless in my pursuit of justice," Naomi has said. "Not just for me, but for every woman who has been failed by a system that's supposed to protect us." It's not over. Her advocacy has led to changes in how Miami-Dade County handles domestic violence cases. Training programs now educate officers about the dynamics of abuse and the importance of treating restraining order violations seriously. Prosecutors receive additional guidance on presenting domestic violence cases to juries. But Naomi's fight goes beyond policy changes. She's working to change hearts and minds, to help people understand that domestic violence isn't just about individual relationships. It's about power, control, and a society that too often blames victims for the violence inflicted upon them. The case of Naomi Ellis and Marcus Reed isn't just about one woman's survival and one man's acquittal. It's about the systemic failures that allow domestic violence to flourish and abusers to escape consequences. Consider these statistics. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime. On average, 3 women are killed by their intimate partners every day in America. Yet conviction rates for domestic violence remain stubbornly low, particularly in cases where the victim survives. Why? Because domestic violence cases are complex. They involve relationships, emotions, and dynamics that can be difficult for juries to understand. Victims often have complicated feelings about their abusers. They may have stayed in the relationship for years, which defense attorneys use to suggest the abuse wasn't that serious. Restraining orders, which should be one of our most important tools for protecting victims, are violated with alarming frequency. Studies show that approximately 40% of restraining orders are violated within 2 years of being issued. Yet the consequences for violating these orders are often minimal, as Marcus Reed demonstrated when he was released from jail within hours of his first arrest. The intersection of domestic violence and self-defense laws creates additional complications. Abusers often claim they were acting in self-defense, even when they were clearly the aggressors. They exploit legal protections that were designed to protect law-abiding citizens and use them to justify violence against their victims. In Naomi's case, Marcus Reed successfully convinced a jury that shooting an unarmed woman 6 times was reasonable self-defense. But consider the absurdity of that claim. If Naomi had fought back against Marcus's months of abuse, if she had been the one with the gun, would a jury have believed her claim of self-defense? The answer, based on countless similar cases, is almost certainly no. This double standard reveals uncomfortable truths about how we view violence, gender, and victimhood in America. We're willing to excuse extreme violence when it's committed by men against women, but we're skeptical of women who fight back against their abusers. As we reach the end of Naomi's story, we're left with questions that go far beyond this single case. Questions that challenge us to think differently about justice, about domestic violence, and about the society we've created. How do we fix a legal system that allows someone to shoot another person 6 times and call it self-defense? How do we protect victims when restraining orders are treated as mere suggestions? How do we change cultural attitudes that blame victims for staying in abusive relationships instead of holding abusers accountable for their violence? These aren't easy questions, and they don't have simple answers. But they're questions we must ask if we want to prevent more women from experiencing what Naomi Ellis survived. The night of April 15, 2018, was supposed to be the beginning of Naomi Ellis's happily ever after. Instead, it became the night that exposed the darkest failures of our justice system. 6 gunshots that should have led to a murder conviction instead led to an acquittal. A victim who should have been protected was left to rebuild her life alone, while her attacker walked free. But Naomi's story doesn't end with that verdict. It continues with her advocacy, her courage, and her refusal to let the system's failure define her future. She survived 6 bullets, and she's determined to survive the injustice that followed. Her message to other survivors is simple. You are not alone. Your voice matters. And no matter what anyone tells you, what happened to you is not your fault. In a world where domestic violence claims too many lives and ruins too many others, Naomi Ellis stands as proof that survival is possible, even when justice feels impossible. The question now is whether we'll listen to survivors like Naomi and demand the changes necessary to prevent others from walking the same terrifying path. Whether we'll hold our legal system accountable for protecting victims instead of excusing their abusers. Because until we do, there will be more Marcus Reeds walking free, and more Naomi Ellises fighting not just for their lives, but for a justice that remains frustratingly out of reach. What do you think? In a case where the evidence seemed so clear, where the violence was so extreme, how did our system fail so completely? And more importantly, what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? The answers to those questions might determine whether the next woman in Naomi's situation survives not just the violence itself, but the injustice that too often follows. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. Remember, like Naomi Ellis proves every day, survival is possible, and you deserve better than living in fear. This has been the story of Naomi Ellis, a bride who never made it to her wedding, but who found the strength to fight for justice even when justice failed her. Her courage in sharing her story might just save the next woman who finds herself trapped in a nightmare that feels impossible to escape. Because sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones we fight for ourselves, they're the ones we fight to protect others from walking the same dark path we survived.